Hello there, photo friends. Welcome to Luminous Landscape Photography. 3 decades of wisdom, one lesson at a time. I'm Swindy, and today we're diving into something really special for you. It's a conversation with a renowned photographer named Arthur Drooker about his breathtaking project, 36 Views of the Golden Gate Bridge. Taking inspiration from Hokusai's famous woodblock prints, Arthur asked himself a fascinating question: how to photograph something that everybody's photographed? With 3 simple rules he followed. No postcard shots, only shoot black and white, and find something new. So Arthur spent 2 years creating a series that transforms this iconic structure into something thoughtful, fresh, contemplative. So whether you're a working photographer or simply love seeing familiar subjects through an artist's lens, you're in for a treat. Well, let's go ahead and hear from Arthur. Well, maybe you could describe a particular image that was challenging to capture for you.
Yes, it's an image called Marshall's Beach.
Okay.
I always loved this view, but when people ask me what was the most challenging one, I would say this one, and it looks simple enough. It required 3 things. 1, clouds in the background to distinguish the bridge tower from the sky, because if you're seeing in black and white, obviously it's shades of gray or
right
that you're looking at. So you need some white, some clouds to break it up to create that separation. So I needed clouds in the background behind the bridge. I needed a very low tide so I could really go out into the rocks and get that perspective. And I also needed good afternoon light. This is the west side of the bridge we're looking at, the side that faces the ocean. Those are 3 things right there that all have to align. Every day I worked on this project, and I worked on 36 Views of the Golden Gate Bridge over the course of, let's call it 2 to 3 years, which is not to say I photographed every single day for 2 to 3 years, but it was over the course. The Golden Gate Bridge official website has a live cam from the toll plaza, which faces north. So every day I planned to photograph the bridge, I would look at the live cam, because the Golden Gate Bridge is really its own weather pattern, its own ecosystem, if you will. And I live a short 10, 15-minute drive from the bridge. And it could be sunny and clear in Mill Valley where I live. And I would look at the live cam and it could be overcast and foggy and dreary. So that's how specific the weather is at the bridge, because the bridge covers a strait that connects San Francisco Bay with the Pacific Ocean. And there's a lot going on down there, wind-wise, barometric pressure, precipitation, all that stuff. So you become almost an amateur weatherman. I would look at the live cam every day, and if it looked hospitable, okay, that's promising. And then I would look at tide charts, because if I was looking to photograph from a beach perspective, and there are a few beaches on both sides of the bridge, I would want to know when low tide was, because that would give me better access to certain perspectives, including Marshall's Beach. And then, of course, I would need, even though I would want clouds in the background of the bridge, I still needed good light on the bridge itself, especially in the afternoon, for this perspective. I was consulting weather reports, tide charts, and the live cam. So they had to align. I live a short 10, maybe 15-minute drive to the bridge. So I go, okay, good. It looks good down there. I'm going to hop in the car. I'm going to go down there and then hike down to Marshall's Beach, which is a good 20-minute hike down to this specific area. And then frequently, by the time I would get down there, the tide would change or the clouds would dissipate or disappear. And, basically all I would get from it was a good walk, But one day, everything aligned, and that's the picture you see here. And it took many tries. I didn't count exactly how many, but it took many tries to get this. So I was extremely pleased when it all worked out. And for that reason and others, it's one of my favorite shots in the entire series.
It is quite remarkable. I must say the tones are really eye-catching, from lights to the darks and the blacks and the,
Right.
I mean, really wonderful.
Thank you. And the textures too. I mean, those muscles, the textures on the rocks, and then the concrete, which is still, it's a little rough, but still smooth on the bridge in some ways, and the grace of the bridge itself. So there's some nice contrasts. Everything came together.
When you came back a couple of times, did you already have the spot marked out, or was this on the day you just found it again?
That's a good question. It was, I guess, a combination of the two. I knew in general where to be, but when you have a low tide and a really low one, that was like the one on this particular day or time of day, certain things were new to me, like, oh, I didn't know I could go out this far because the tide was so low. And that gave me access to rocks I had either never seen before or didn't know were as big as they were, because on previous visits, the tide was still high enough where some of the rocks were still below the water. On this particular day, when the tide was extremely low, I was just blown away by how many rocks there were and how big they were, how scattered they were, and how it all afforded me a newer angle that I hadn't seen before because I hadn't had that access before. But it didn't take me long, because it was like, okay, this is it. It's very clear to me, this is it.
What are we looking at, like, in terms of how this was captured? Like, what kind of camera, what kind of technical approach?
Sure. Okay, just for all the gearheads out there.
Yeah.
I started this project using a Canon 5D Mark II.
Okay.
I've been a Canon guy. I was actually a Canon boy, because I started photography when I was about 14 or 15. And the first camera I ever used was a Canon FTB. So I stayed with Canon for decades.
Yeah.
And so I started out with a Canon 5D Mark II, which I had for about a good 14, 15 years. And then over the course of this shoot, I transitioned to a Canon R5. I love that camera. I call it a little beast. I mean, Canon packed a whole lot of camera in that little thing. Compared to the 5D Mark II, it's much lighter. It's very compact. It's almost a bit of a show-off camera, because it has a lot of bells and whistles that,
doesn't it?
I'm not so sure a lot of photographers really need, but I guess it's good to know they're there. Most of it ultimately ended up being shot with the R5, using a 24 to 105 lens, f4 lens. And sometimes I would use a Canon 70 to 200 telephoto, again, f4. And then I'm a big fan, I have to say, I'm a big fan of iPhone photography. There's about 5 images in this series, the iPhone 12 Pro Max.
Isn't that incredible? Isn't it incredible?
And I defied people to tell me which shot were made with the iPhone versus with the Canon. Because if you're shooting Apple RAW, as you and others would probably know, you can get a 20-something, 30-something megabyte file.
Yeah.
And even though you're dealing with smaller lenses, the resolution is pretty damn good. And in post, you can boost that if you need to. If you need to, not always. So I was very impressed. And I found that the iPhone gave me a certain kind of mobility and access I couldn't always get with the Canon. I found that very helpful. But the vast majority, that was about 5 pictures. So we're talking 36. Actually, there's 40 in the book. So we're looking about, 35 images were taken with either the Canon 5D Mark II or the R5.
Going back to the Marshall's Beach, is this one an iPhone, or is it?
No, this was
a Canon.
Yeah, this was the R5.
So when you approach something using the R5, are you focus stacking? Are you shooting multiple layers? Or you just...
I did not do focus stacking on this project. Most of the time, I really didn't feel like I needed to or wanted to.
Right.
And also, I was, most of these, the vast majority of these photos were handheld, were made handheld.
Oh, very
not
cool.
Not with a tripod. But I did a lot of bracketing, a lot of bracketing.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that, I guess that speaks to the tones that you're able to get at the end of that.
Yes. Yes. Because, with bracketing, of course, you want to bring out, open up the darks and all that sort of thing. So I did a lot of that.
What kind of stop range are you going? Just curious, like a +2, -2 kind of thing?
It would depend on the situation, but I would start out +1 and -1.
Uh-huh.
But if it was super contrasty, I would do +2, -2. And sometimes I would start out at 0. And then, in other words, I wouldn't shoot anything under.
Oh. Oh. So you were just protecting the highlights, I suppose.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it would really just depend on the location. And one thing I found too with the iPhone was, there's, when you're shooting in the iPhone, and maybe, a lot of your subscribers know this already, I'm sure they do, with the iPhone Pro Max, that level of iPhone, you're getting HDR built into the exposure. So I could really see what I was getting in real time.
Is there a shutter speed that you said, okay, I'm not going to do it? Are you holding your breath, or how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've got a pretty steady hand.
Okay.
So ideally, I wouldn't go lower than, let's say, to play it safe, I wouldn't go lower than a 60th of a second. But I admit, on the bracketing, some of those exposures were like a 30th of a second. But, I would hold my breath. It was rock solid. So
better, yeah.
yeah, so I'm lucky. I got a steady hand. But if I would, let's put it this way: anything under a 30th of a second, I would definitely use a tripod, without a doubt.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, at least. Yeah, yeah.
Well, so what is your software of choice when you are doing the bracketing, and how do you deal with working?
Well, I do not optimize my own images. I work with someone sitting right beside him when he optimizes. And so, when it comes to bracketed images, I will do a pre-edit in terms of selecting which images are to be optimized, including the 3 images that need to be HDR'd. But sometimes there'll be several versions of one setup where I've bracketed, where we will HDR, let's call them 2, 3, or 4 trios of bracketed images, just because there might be slight variations. And then we'll HDR each threesome, if you will.
Yeah.
And then once they're HDR'd, look at them side by side and see which one looks best, feels best. And we tend to agree. Sometimes he'll say, there's something going on here that I may not have seen before, which is why I appreciate working with somebody when it comes to optimizing images. If I really respect their vision and their eye, I welcome their input. I know a lot of photographers can be very possessive, if you will, of maintaining control throughout. But even though I'm working with an optimizer, if there's something I don't like, I definitely speak up. But I always have found that I personally find it very helpful when I'm working with someone who really knows their stuff, is also an artist in the way they look at things.
Yes.
And can really contribute something to making something better that, quite frankly, I may not have thought of.
Yeah.
So I welcome that. And also, quite frankly, I'm not the most technical guy in the world. I know enough to be a little dangerous, but I certainly defer to others, especially when it comes to optimizing, who've done it for years. So we will, in the case of bracketed images, we'll do the HDR, we'll compare them to other HDR images of a similar setup, make a selection in the final one, optimize that. And when it comes to optimizing, I don't want to get too crazy with it. Work the curves a little, for contrast.
Masking, sharpening, any of that?
Yes, clarity, masking out a little bit in terms of saving one area but concentrating on another area, the usual kind of thing. Clarity, dehazing, because sometimes when you're shooting down there, you need to dehaze just to see what the hell you're looking at. And then I always I shouldn't say always because there's always exceptions, but a lot of the time I do like vignetting. I find that it helps concentrate the eye. Mm-hmm. And focuses how you look at the image. And if it's done subtly, it can be very effective.
It was interesting talking about you working with an optimizer. I come from I'm a director of photography from the film world and commercial world. And so I've always enjoyed sitting with the colorist, and
yes.
And so it sounds like, is that coming from your documentary world? Did you?
Well, it's interesting you say that because, now that you bring it up, having done TV documentaries that are shot on video, and then in some cases in post-production, if we have the budget, the person who's creating that film look, the technician, is also a colorist. He's tweaking the colors. But because this is black and white, we're not tweaking colors per se. But we are tweaking the black and white. Oh, and something else that we would do is in Lightroom, there's these various black and white options that are numbered. I think it's 1 through 13, and then after that, it's green filter, blue filter, yellow filter, orange filter, etc., red filter. Once we did like a simple black and white conversion, we would run it through the various options to see if that brought out something interesting, something worth pursuing in the image, and then work it a little more. These are presets that, again, I'm sure your readers are familiar with, but it just helps accelerate the process. So to me, in the way I work, they're usually starting points, they're not end points.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah. You kind of work it into what it ends up being.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Well, getting to that, the bridge is orange. Why did you choose to do black and white?
The Golden Gate Bridge is arguably the most photographed bridge in the world. Various estimates say around 10 million people visit the bridge every year. Right. So you got to believe there's got to be at least 10 million photographs I know. Made at the Golden Gate Bridge. At least, right? At least. Because when I would photograph the bridge, I would see all these tourists there and understandably do their selfies and take pictures of their friends. I totally get it. Of course, that's what you're going to do when you go to the Golden Gate Bridge.
That's right.
So, and then they post these photos. So you have tons of color photos of the Golden Gate Bridge taken by amateurs and professionals. After a while, it creates what I call visual numbness. You don't really see the bridge anymore. I mean, your eye registers it, obviously, in a nanosecond. Oh, yeah, the Golden Gate Bridge. And then you move on. You're not really looking at the bridge. You're identifying the bridge and then maybe looking at the people in the photo or whatever. But you're really not looking at the bridge. It's just, like I said, an identifier. With black and white, the bridge becomes something else because black and white photography in general reduces the subject to its essence. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you're challenging the viewer. You're making the viewer work a little harder. And when it's something as familiar as the Golden Gate Bridge, you're going to see things in that bridge you never saw before. You're certainly going to look at that bridge differently than you've seen it in color. You just are. Because the color is a distraction. And the black and white removes that distraction. So now you're really looking at this thing in all its shadow, in all its light, in all its line, in all its form, in all its texture. So that's why I chose black and white, to really make the viewer, force the viewer in a good way to look at something that is so familiar differently. And quite frankly, it was a challenge to myself as a photographer. That's one of the reasons why I took on this project. It was a self-imposed project. It was a challenge to myself. Is there a way to see this bridge differently than it's typically seen? Right. And I like to think I accomplished that. Not just shooting in black and white, but also shooting it from perspectives that are little known. Also choosing not to shoot from typical postcard angles.
Right.
You know, if you want to see a postcard shot of the Golden Gate Bridge, just go online and do a search for Golden Gate Bridge photos. Or if you're coming to San Francisco, people go, you know, they'll do a search for fun things to do in San Francisco. And what pops up on that homepage? You know, a typical classic color scenic photo of the Golden Gate Bridge. You can see those all day long. I didn't want to do that shot. They've already been taken. It was very important for me not to shoot what would be, I would say, a typical postcard shot.
Sounds like you probably took, over the course of 2 years, I mean, thousands of pictures, right? I mean,
well, we're not going to count the ones I deleted, but the ones but the ones I thought would be quote unquote book worthy, which doesn't mean they will all end up in the book, but it means they're worthy of consideration for a book. It was just under 100.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But, you know, we're not counting all the ones I deleted, you know, some variations on a theme that I eventually refined to the point where it's like, okay, you know, this is it, which really bore little resemblance to what it started out being. But yeah, I think, it was something like 96 photos I ended up with that I thought were book worthy. And from those 96, I edited it down to 36. And perhaps your readers might want to know why 36.
Yes, well, let's get into that.
Okay, Hokusai, right.
Yes.
So for those who don't know, Hokusai was a 19th century Japanese artist who created these wonderful woodblock prints. And he did 36 views. He created 36 woodblock prints of Mount Fuji. And each one was a different perspective on Mount Fuji. Sometimes the mountain was relatively close. Other times it was so far away in the print, it was almost like a Where's Waldo? It was so far in the background. But these prints, each one was from a different perspective, near, close, different times of the year in terms of seasons, different types of weather. And as a result, you really get to see the cumulative effect is seeing Mount Fuji in a very intimate way. You get to see, like, you know, the moods of the mountain, if you will. And I thought that was a great way to approach photographing the Golden Gate Bridge. To me, a sequence should only be as long as the number of photographs you need to tell that story. And I found actually 36 to be a great number. It really imposes a sense of discipline and order on what you're doing. But it's a good number in that, you know, you can really do something with 36 photos. But it also is limited enough that you really have to discipline yourself and make hard decisions about what stays in and what goes out. And it's always that case of kill your darlings. There are some photos that did not make it into the book that I love, but quite frankly, didn't contribute to the overall narrative flow.
Was there a guiding principle to pick those 36, or was it just a gut instinct that you're like, that doesn't fit?
I've done enough books now where I guess you could say it was a gut instinct. Because what I would do is when I started to have enough images to play around with the sequencing, which would be, you know, maybe about a dozen or 15 images into the project, where I thought I had 12 to 15 book-worthy images, that's when I would start to play around with sequencing, just to see how the images relate to, talk to each other, and then use that as a starting point. And then as I shot more, a very interesting thing starts to happen around that time. And I've done about 7 or 8 books at this point. And it's to me, I'm always amazed by this, because it makes you wonder if there are external forces at play, which is the following. At a certain point, the project starts talking back to you. It tells you what it is. It tells you what it needs. and it tells you what would work and what wouldn't work. It's almost like it's dialoguing with you as its own entity. Even though you are the one creating it, somehow it's talking back to you. It's reflecting back to you what's really going on. And to me, I always look forward to that moment when I'm putting book projects together. There were some images that, they were nice, they were cool, whatever, but they kind of didn't belong because it just didn't work visually with the overall flow that was emerging on its own. I don't want to get too woo-woo about it, but I feel sometimes there's something mystical going on about this.
Yeah.
You think you're in control, but you're only maybe, I would say, 95% in control if you're lucky, maybe. But there's that 5%, whatever it is, whatever that percentage is, you got to pay attention to that. You really do.
Absolutely. I absolutely know what you're saying. And
so
to that effect, how are you approaching the book versus the exhibition like that? How is that different? Is that a different kind of flow, or how the exhibition's going to be different? Or,
great questions. The exhibition is the one that's going to be at the Image Flow in San Anselmo. Actually, the opening is next week. So, hey, if you want to fly out from Atlanta, come on out,
Thanks for the invite.
But that particular exhibition is going to have only 14 of the 36. It's not going to be the entire series, just 14. For that, I thought it would probably be best that each of the 14 images, you get a very clear view of the bridge, as opposed to some of the more abstract images of the bridge. But I just thought, to get the point across about different perspectives of the bridge, I thought, and because I was not obviously going to be using all 30 prints of all 36 images, I just thought it would really get to the point quicker.
Right.
To show these different views of the bridge. And it's the one constant as you go from image to image, because the spacing in the gallery, it's a nice space, but there's 10 images on one wall and 4 on another. And the images are pretty close together. There's maybe 4 inches of space, 5 inches of space on either side of the frame prints. So I think by having that concentrated repetition of the bridge, again, it really enforces the form of the bridge. And it's also that one anchor point that the viewer going from image to image can hold on to as you basically get these different perspectives around the bridge. So you end up getting a 360 perspective, the cumulative effect of going from picture to picture. The prints they're 16 by 20 prints, and then they have 2.5-inch matte all around, and then simple black frames.
Are they mostly in portrait?
Yes, there are 4 landscapes and then 10 portrait. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of how you decided which wall was. These are the portraits.
No, actually, I interspersed horizontals, landscapes with the portraits.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that it's not, you do not see 10 portraits in a row, and then the other wall has 4 horizontals. I really wanted to mix it up to keep the eye moving up, down, across. A museum curator taught me that lesson years ago. I had an exhibition at this small museum in Wisconsin, and this was for my American Ruins series, and they were all horizontal images. And he advised me in a very friendly way. He said, the next time you do an exhibition, really play around with the size of your prints and also horizontals versus verticals. And he said, I'll never forget, he said, you want an undulation of the eye. In his Wisconsin accent, an undulation of the eye, Arthur. But I never forgot it. I never forgot it. It was a great lesson in how to present prints. You really want to energize the eye. And all the while creating a nice sequencing that has some kind of flow and connection from one print to the other.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
This is for the budding people that would like to have a book and also exhibition. Is there any kind of advice or any kind of roadmap that you would suggest doing this?
For as far as a book goes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. How do you
Yes.
present that? Yeah.
Sure. Well, for those who want to, I think most photographers would love to see a book of their work.
Yes.
I think photography and bookmaking go hand in hand. I would say there's always a fundamental question to ask from the get-go. Is this a book? Now, you could answer that very easily and say yes, because the means of production now are in the hands of everybody. You can go to Blurb or other services that provide, that can make a book of your work. All you have to do is basically send in your files with a simple layout, and boom, there you are. So the simple answer is yes. You can always make a book of your work. But if you're a serious photographer who wants to make a book of your work, ask yourself, is this particular series you're working on, is it a book? Because some series may not be substantial enough to justify a book. And that's okay. It doesn't make your series any less valid. It just may mean it's not a book, or it may not be a book just yet. And then the other fundamental question to ask is, who is the audience? Who would be the audience for this book? Is it what we would call loosely a general readership? Do you think this would have a general audience, or is it for a specific audience? And if it's for a specific audience, who is that specific audience? Throw out some ideas. Is it people who love history? Is it people who are interested in architecture? Is it people who love to travel? Is it people who are interested in a certain time and place? Is it related to a specific event? These are all possibilities. There's no wrong answer here, but it's a question that you should ask yourself, because the answer will inform a lot about how the book gets done, from soup to nuts.
Yeah.
And these are really important questions to ask. And there's no wrong answer, but whatever the answer is will let you know how you go about perhaps funding the book. It may influence who you get to write an essay for the book, or it may affect who would want to show the work. And if it's a museum or a gallery, might they help you seek funding for the book? So that, these answers have ripple effects,
right,
on how you can go about putting the book together. And I also suggest you immerse yourself in what it takes to put a book together. Not that you have to become an expert on printing, but it would be helpful for you if you're shooting in color and want to put a color book together. It would be helpful to know about things like CMYK and RGB. And again, it's technical, but you don't have to go crazy on this. You just have to be somewhat familiar with it. Mm-hmm. And then also things like what kind of paper you'd want to use. Is it soft cover? Is it hard cover? And again, there's no wrong answer. It's just, what kind of book can you afford to make? Because there is a cost involved, and that affects the pricing of the book too. I know I'm throwing a lot of things out here.
Great.
But they're the kind of things that any photographer who is serious about putting a book out there needs to consider. And they're not meant to discourage you. They're meant to inform you about how to go about doing it. I have found the whole process very gratifying. I love the process of making a book, and that begins with the initial idea, executing the idea, doing the sequencing, really working out what the book would ultimately look like. Getting in touch with the potential essay writer, getting their interest, And a really good essay writer can talk about your work or write about your work in a way that you might not be able to, and really set the table for how the reader will view your work in the context of the book. It's a great table setter. You may want to write your own introduction, which doesn't duplicate what the essay writer writes, but it just gives a perspective of, why it was so important for you to photograph what you photographed and put it in a book.
How early on in the process did you think that you were going to do something like 36 views of Hokusai?
Well, 36. Well, I think I knew from the get-go. Again, this was like my 7th or 8th book project, so I'm used to working on book projects. So that typically is my ultimate goal. To me, that's a nice goal to work towards. So I knew early on that this was going to be a book.
So that being said, you have another book that you're working on, or is it still this is still on your...
Well, it's funny you're saying that, because I realized I wasn't really done with the Golden Gate Bridge. So what I'm working on now is 36 views of the Golden Gate Bridge, but in color. But what makes it different is that I'm not photographing the bridge itself. What I'm doing is I'm basically wandering the streets of San Francisco. I mean, there are certain areas in particular. I'm wandering certain streets of San Francisco looking for how the Golden Gate Bridge is depicted by other people. And this could be on a mural on a wall. It could be on a sign on a tire shop. It could be a shopping bag from Whole Foods, these are all places where I've seen the Golden Gate Bridge presented either graphically, on a mural, or in somebody else's photograph, but used for commercial purposes. And it's a lot of fun. I'm shooting it all on the iPhone. 36 views of the Golden Gate Bridge in black and white is, very serious.
Right.
It's very serious. Right. Fine art approach. This is meant to be fun and casual, but to me, it still makes its own statement. And I'd like to think that Hokusai would be very amused by what I'm doing in the color version. I'm about halfway through that. I have about 18 or so images for that. And then the other thing I'm working on now, again with the iPhone, as I mentioned earlier, I am a fan of iPhone photography, is I'm also, when I'm going around looking for Golden Gate Bridge depictions, I'm also at the same time photographing window reflections. But I'm doing it in a certain way. I mean, oftentimes people will photograph something reflected in a window, whether it's, let's say, the Golden Gate Bridge, for the sake of discussion, reflected in a window. That, to me, I call one-way reflections. It's one thing reflected in a window, and that's it. But what I'm looking to do is photograph something reflected in a window, but also incorporate what's behind that window and how it relates to or plays with what's reflected into the window. So let's say, like the other day, I was on Fillmore Street in San Francisco. On the street, there was a yellow taxi with green painted fenders, and it had some dashes of red in it. And it was parked across the street from a florist, a flower shop. So I was looking in the window. You see all the flowers that are on display inside the flower shop. If you're really looking at large, you'll see the taxi from across the street reflected in the window. So you're seeing the taxi, this yellow and green taxi, and then you got the flowers behind that window. So you see the taxi is floating in with these purplish and yellow flowers. It's almost surreal looking.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, this interesting interplay between what's in the window and what's reflected in the window. So I call that almost like double vision.
Right.
in a way. Or think of it as a form of double exposure.
Right.
That's what it is. But it's all natural. I'm not doing anything in camera except looking through the lens and photographing what I see at this particular window. To me, I describe it almost like painting with a camera.
Yeah.
Where a lot of some painters like to juxtapose certain things in what we would call, reality. Well, it's almost like surrealism, right? Where you're taking these different elements and you're putting them together in unexpected ways to create their own reality. It's almost like dreamscapes in a way. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm just having a lot of fun with it. And what the ultimate outcome is, we shall see.
Wonderful. It sounds like you enjoy going out and exploring. And
I do. I do. And the camera,
yeah.
And the camera is the best excuse to do it.
So how do you just walk around with your eyes wide open?
I do. I do. Like in the case of, right now, in case of the Golden Gate Bridge, in other words, of looking to see how others depict the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm always on the lookout for that. And then I'm always, and at the same time, I'm always looking in various windows of stores. And I go to certain neighborhoods in San Francisco where I think the likelihood of seeing those kinds of things is better than, I have a better than 50-50 chance of seeing that kind of thing. So, for example, there's Mission Street in San Francisco, Fillmore Street, as I mentioned before. There's Fisherman's Wharf, which is very touristy, but that has a lot of shops. Chinatown in San Francisco has been fantastic for both window reflections and depictions of the Golden Gate Bridge, because it's touristy. But the thing about Chinatown is that the streets are very narrow. So when you're on one side of the street, seeing whatever's reflected into the window you're looking at, it's kind of close, as opposed to being far away with a wider street. So that I've gotten some great reflection shots in Chinatown. Yeah. I got one shot where it looks like decorative kite of a fish, like a fish kite.
Yes.
In Japanese, very colorful, was hanging in one window, but it was reflected across the street where there was a building with a fire escape. So it looks like the fish is floating up the fire escape.
Oh, neat.
That's been a lot of fun. So yeah, I'll just, I go with a very loose plan. So like I mentioned earlier, I will go to certain areas of San Francisco that are very commercial, have a lot of shops, stores, where the likelihood of interesting things hanging in windows and the possibility of seeing some image of the Golden Gate Bridge used for commercial purposes exist. And it's just been a lot of fun. And, I get to know San Francisco that much better. Yeah. Meanwhile, Atlanta, your town, that's a hot town, right?
Yeah, well, not this week. Bizarrely, I've had the...
Oh, yeah. Do you have snow on the ground there?
It's done now. Okay. But I've been basically, cabin fever for about almost a week.
Really?
Oh, we shut down over here. We just...
Wow.
Yeah, we're just like, nah, just stay home, everybody.
Wow. Are you from Atlanta?
I'm born in Atlanta, but I was raised down in St. Pete, Florida.
Listen, I grew up on the East Coast in New York, and I can tell you, I experienced a lot of snow when I was growing up, but one of the reasons why I moved to California was I was done with snow and cold winter weather.
Oh, yeah. Arthur, it's been so awesome to talk to you.
Great. Well, I was great. Thank you so much for your interest, and I love the questions. And when an interview becomes a discussion or a conversation, that's when you know it's good. So hopefully you got some stuff to work with.
Oh,
and
100%.
Listen, if you ever do come out here, give me a call.
100%.
Let me know.
Let's wander.
Yeah, let's wander. Exactly. Let's do that. Okay.
All right.
All right. Take care.